fire with shadows on my heels. Scars turn to stories that taught me to feel. Lost in the silence, found in the flame. Now wear my battle cry without shame. This isn't the end, it's where I begin. A soul that remembers the fire within.
Welcome back to another episode of A Warrior Spirit, brought to you by Praxis 33. I'm your host, Daryl Snow. Let's dive in. Today, I'm doing something a little different. I'm sharing my own journey and my own story. I've done this in snippets throughout my career, but I'm doing it with intention to share some of my life and what I've overcome in order to get to where I've been. And I know that some of my family who hears this part of my story may not have known parts of it. Some may be hurt by some of the things I say or share. And I apologize up front for any of that. It's not intended for any of that. It's intended to share my alchemist journey and the path that I've been on. Today, when this airs, I will be 59 years old. Today will be March 6th, my birthday. And for the first time in my entire life, I feel like I'm living my own life. I have had a very tumultuous start and upbringing. When I was born in Minneapolis, my parents weren't exactly in love with each other and didn't really get along with each other. And my childhood was filled with a lot of angst and trauma. First memories of childhood center around my biological father hitting my mother, my biological father pointing a gun at her and pulling the trigger. Luckily, the chamber was empty. But oddly enough, I never recall a single time where he abused my sister or I. What I do recall is often the abuse my mother laid upon us. When you grow up in that environment or grow up in that chaos, you kind of think that it's normal. And by today's standards, it would actually be considered child abuse. My parents split when I was like around 5. And then we never saw my biological father again until I was in my early 20s. But through all that time, my mom worked 2 and 3 jobs. My sister and I were latchkey kids. I often was responsible for taking care of my sister after we come home from school. I was also her protector from the environment around us. I remember in kindergarten having to carry a knife to school because the inner city that I grew up in was pretty urban and poverty was rampant and violence was high. And forgive me for if I'm pausing a little too much as I share this story. Some of it is still a little fresh and new to my own healing, so it still causes me a little bit of pause when I share it. But I'm not sharing this story to come from a place of victimhood. I'm not sharing this story so anyone might pity or anything like that. I'm sharing it from a story of victory because I finally have overcome my past and overcome my childhood and have overcome all the things that have shaped who I was for so many years. I remember times as a child coming home and there'd be an eviction notice on the door or, something where we'd have to move again. So we were never really in one home for very long. We never had a lot of stability. But through it all, I had my sister. And later in life, when I was probably 8, 7, 8, somewhere in there, my mom hired a young girl to be our babysitter. So she would, spend after school with us until my mom would get home. She would care for us. She would walk us to school. And then in the summertime, we hung out with her, you know, almost 24/7. And really, she was the first person in my life who was kind and caring and gentle, and I really grew to love her in my own innocent way. And I realized that I carry that love for her through my heart today. And she was someone who shaped my life. And growing up in the environment that I did, with the revolving door of men that were in and out of my mom's life, and the adults who were there, I also became the protector of my babysitter. There was several instances where these gentlemen would try to harm my babysitter. And even as a young boy, 8, 9 years old, I stepped in and you know stopped whatever was about to transpire. So um, I know she and I have talked recently, and she is grateful for my part in her life, and I'm extremely grateful in her part in mine. But then when I was about 9 or 10, my mom met a new man. He was vastly different from any of the other men that were in her life. He was kind and considerate and loving, and um, my mom ended up marrying him. And he already had 3 children of his own, but he took my sister and I in as if we were his own, and he always treated us as his own. And then eventually he adopted us. And I remember his name is Larry Snow. Um, and he forever will be my father in my heart. Never treated us as stepchildren, always treated us as his own. And I remember we became snow on the first day of summer in 1976. So it's an easy date for me to remember. And he is one of the only heroes I've ever had in my life. He taught integrity, he taught compassion, he taught love unconditionally. Most of my lessons in my life that I still hold true came from my dad. And he passed away a few years ago, but he forever is still in my heart, and someone that I want to have his legacy continue to grow. But even in spite of moving to Iowa out of the inner city, life was still full of chaos. My mom was still full of anger and rage, and still had a lot of uh, violent ways of disciplining. I remember one time I was at my grandfather's house, and was doing something probably that I shouldn't have been. And she came down to the basement, and on her way down, my grandfather had a bullwhip hanging on the wall. And on the way down, my mother grabbed that bullwhip and actually snapped it on me. So I learned at that moment, you know, you run towards the whip, not away from it, because it hurts less. But anyway, those were still some of the issues that I was growing up with. I don't remember. I don't remember a single time where my mom just hugged me and said, "I love you." Now, today, she always says how proud she is of me, and how she always knew I could do anything I wanted to, and I would be, you know, whatever I wanted to be. But growing up, I never had that recollection or that, and maybe she did, I don't know, but I remember more of the punishments than I ever do the hugs and the love. So, but I remember my father hugging us always and telling us he loved us, and always felt that from him. So it was quite a different style of parenting for sure. As a child, my grandfather, he was an army man, military man, very strict Catholic. So life in his house was very rigid, very matter of fact, very cold. Um, and he was a construction worker when he got home from the service. So he was very uh, of that manly man type of ilk. And when I was, I don't know, 4, I guess, my uncle, who was 15 at the time, he was helping my grandfather on a construction. Um, at the yard, they were having to put away some of the heavy machinery and some of the equipment, and my uncle climbed underneath one of the bobcats to release the ice from it so that they could put it away. And something triggered the mechanism to come down on him. And although it didn't crush him, his death certificate says that he died of fear. So his heart just stopped. He was so afraid of what was transpiring while he was under there and that mechanism coming down that he died of fear. And um, this kind of tore the family apart as well. My mom has a couple sisters, and then my uncle was the only boy. And now at age 15, he was no longer with us. And my mom kind of, some would say, lost her mind and went crazy. I know it was an emotional trauma that she's never really recovered from. I know it was an emotional trauma that my grandparents never really recovered from. And the sad part about this story for me, other than the fact that he was my buddy and my idol growing up, and at age 4, I used to shadow him around everywhere. But the hard part for me growing up after that is that I looked identical to my uncle. As a matter of fact, in my high school graduation picture, if you put his photo next to my photo, everything is the same. The way the hair was worn, the shadowing of the photo, the suits. The only thing that was different was the clothes and the material that the suits were made out of. And that picture, my grandfather and my grandmother wouldn't even accept. I tried to give my grandparents a photo, my high school photo, and they wouldn't accept it because I looked so much like my uncle that it was too traumatic for them to have in the house. So my relationship with my grandparents wasn't much better than my relationship with my mother. And um, as a matter of fact, when I was I don't know, about 18 years old, 19, somewhere in there, right after high school, I had a chance to move away from the small town in Iowa that I grew up in. And I was in sales at the time. I was selling I think at the time I was selling home fire equipment, whole house protection for families. And I was making pretty good money. I was doing well for a, early late teenager, early 20s. And when I was going to move away, I wanted to um, go make amends with my grandfather because earlier in my career he had asked me when I was going to get a real job, and that really pissed me off because I was making more than he ever did. I felt sales was a real job, and just because it wasn't labor intensive like he was doing, I felt really dismissed in that comment. And I had told him at the time that I was making more money than he ever would, so I had a real job, and that comment in the heat of the moment caused a rift that was even bigger for us. And I didn't even talk to him for a year or so after I said that. But when I went to take this out of state sales job, I went to um, make amends with my grandfather because I knew that I'd probably never see him again if I was moving away and he was getting older. I didn't want to leave our relationship like that. So I went over to their house. And when I walked inside, I my grandmother, she always sat at the little kitchen table there, and she was sitting there, and my grandfather just kind of looked at me and asked me what I was doing there. And I told him that, I was leaving the state, that I was going to be moving away, and that I just wanted to say I'm sorry and mend our relationship. And I stuck out my hand to shake his hand. And my grandfather just looked at me and turned and walked away. He never shook my hand, never accepted my apology, never said anything. And I looked at my grandmother and I said, Grandma, I'm sorry I tried. And, I wish you both well. And walked out the door, and I never really saw them again until they were, well, I never really saw my grandfather again until dementia took over and he didn't really know who I was. And never saw my grandmother again until she was almost ready to leave this earth as well. So, needless to say, for 40 plus years, I never even went to their gravesite. Um, I didn't feel a connection to them. I never felt a reason to go even visit. So, um, but eventually I moved away, and I found myself moving every couple of years. I would literally throw a dart at a map, and wherever it would land, I would move. Um, and what I realized is that I wasn't really moving just to move. I was moving to run from myself and run from the inner demons that I was still battling. And um, throughout my life, in my early 20s, there was a couple of attempts at suicide. Um, One was with some pills, and one was with actually just almost driving head on into oncoming traffic. I turned the wheel slightly uh, and then turned it back because I didn't want to devastate somebody else's life by trying to take my own. Um, but um, when I was in my mid 20s, I was living uh, in Kansas. I had met a girl that lived there. She had a couple young boys, and fell in love with her and was wanting to make a home with her. So we were going to move out of Kansas and we were going to go to Texas. And I went ahead to um, prepare our life together and got a job, got an apartment, was getting ready for her to come live with me, and I got a phone call that said that she had been in a car accident and she was in a coma in the hospital, and my whole world crumbled once again. And her parents didn't like me much because I was taking their little girl out of their little town, and they didn't like that. So when she was in the car accident, they didn't let me see her. They didn't let me come to the hospital and visit her. And so I had to stay in my little apartment in Texas and just kind of wait for updates. Well, when she came out of her coma, um, she didn't remember me. She didn't remember our life together. She didn't remember that we were moving. And um, so in my heart and in my mind, she had died that day. And I remember laying in my bed. Um, no, I had just moved, had just got a new job, and it was in sales, so it was in commissions. And so I didn't have a whole lot of extra money. So I was so devastated, I um, stopped working, stopped living, just laid in my bed every day, asking God to take and make it my last day. And I was selling off all of my possessions so that I could afford rent, was, you know, not eating, just sleeping, in a severe state of depression. And when it finally came down to where I had no more possessions to sell, I decided to go back home to Iowa for a quick visit and just kind of recoup. And I remember my dad's mom, my grandma, the one who was loving and caring and such a joy and a light in our world. Grandma Zinzer, I hold you in my heart to this day, and appreciate all that you gave us. But anyway, I was my family didn't really know how depressed and the hole that I had dug myself in, and so I went back home, and I was talking with my grandmother, and we were doing dishes, and I started to open up to her about the emotional state I was in. And my grandmother I mean, she has a great affinity for God, and she loves the Lord, and knows His grace and mercy. And so she has this gentleness about her, or she did at the time anyway. She's now long since passed, but um, we were talking about my situation and what had happened with my fiance, and what I had done to myself because of it. And my grandma asked me, what would she do? What would she say? What would my fiance say to me? And, I kind of smart ass, half jokingly said, well, she'd probably slap me. And without missing a single beat on the dish rag, my grandmother, in a very gentle voice, said, "Consider yourself slapped." And those words jolted my life. I was like, oh my gosh, I really need to go get my crap together. So I stayed about another week, and then I moved back to gather my things. And I had no job, I had no money, I had no possessions other than the clothes that I could fit in my car. And I decided to move to Phoenix, Arizona. And so I was homeless, living on the streets, selling blood for gas money and or plasma. And what I would do is I would go to people's apartment complexes. In Phoenix, it's nice out, the sun's out, people are out. So people would be like playing tennis or, doing whatever. And I would strike up conversations with them and convinced enough people to allow me to spend a night or two on their couch so that the next day I could shower and go look for work. I refused to be standing on a street corner begging for money, but I wanted to go find work. And So for about a month, I was homeless, and as a matter of fact, I spent one night in the downtown Phoenix YMCA, and that was so scary of an environment that I decided I was safer in my car. I actually decided that living in my car was a better place for me than the Y. So anyway, um, it was about September, and it's still pretty hot here in Phoenix in September, and I was at this gas station. I had a little bit of money. I could afford a soda. But as I looked up, I saw this restaurant across the street, and it was an all-you-can-eat buffet restaurant. And I knew I didn't have any money to buy the food, but I also knew that it was air conditioned and I could get out of the heat and, kind of home through the want ads. This was back in the day where you actually had to use a newspaper to find a job, and there was no cell phones. So I went in, I got my soda, I sat down, and I was reading the want ads, and a manager came over and he said, I see you're looking for work. Would you consider working here? We have an associate manager's position open. And I said, sure, whatever. So I filled out the job application, I handed it back to him, and he said, when our district manager comes in, we will give you a call and interview you. And again, this was before cell phones. I was living out of my car. So I knew in my heart there was no way that was ever going to happen. But I said, thank you. And he went on his way. Well, 5 minutes later, the district manager came into that particular restaurant unexpectedly. And he interviewed me and he hired me right on the spot. And so now I had a job. I had a job that one of the benefits was a meal, so I could eat at least once a day. And eventually it allowed me to get off the streets and into an apartment. So I know God was looking out for me and blessing me that day. There's been many ways that He's done that over my lifetime. Um, but that particular one really stands out for me. So but I still hadn't dealt with any of my inner demons and all the traumas that I was trying to overcome, all the inner fights and battles. I earned my Eagle Scout when I was 18, and even that didn't bring me a lot of joy because I felt like I was having to do it for my uncle and not for myself. My uncle, before he died, as I mentioned, he was an Eagle Scout. He was class president. He was an honor student. He won the presidential award for some junior thing that he did, junior politics thing that he did. And he was always at the top of everything he did. And I always felt that somehow I had to live up to who he was going to be since he didn't get to. I felt that I was the replacement for him in my family's life. And so between that and the trauma with my mother and all the fights that I used to get into, I mean, growing up in Iowa, I was smaller than any of the farm kids, and all the farm kids wanted to, prove how tough they were. So every single year from the time I was in kindergarten until probably 2 years after high school, I was in a fight at least once per year. And the funny thing is, those kids fought just to fight. I fought to survive, which is a very different fighting style and mentality when you're in the fight. So even though I used to get picked on and get beat up, I rarely lost a fight because when you fight from crazy, it's hard to hard to win for that. But anyway, I even my stepbrother and I used to get into fights a lot. And then when we were about 16, my dad demanded that we never do that again because we were getting to the point where we could hurt each other. So instead, what my stepbrother would do is he would get his friends to fight me. I'd be at the roller rink, and before I knew it, I was outside fighting some kid that my stepbrother had, directed towards me. Or I remember one time I came home. I forget where I was, but I came home and my stepbrother and a couple of his friends were sitting at the table, and I remember hearing him say, "There he is, go get him." And the next thing I know, I'm out on the front lawn fighting one of my brother's friends for no apparent reason other than the fact that I just existed. But that was kind of the life that I grew up in, and so I always led this angry life, trying to be someone I wasn't, but someone I wanted to be, and just always this duality in my world. I had an inner rage and an outer calm. Straight A B student, honor student, Eagle Scout, top of my work environment wherever I went, always in the top 2 or 3% of performance, but never really truly living my own life. And so I went through this for the last 58 years. I've been uh, angry, I've been harsh, I've been short, I've been um, very direct, very bold, very outspoken. Because the reality is, I don't give a crap whether you like me or not. I want things to be done with honor and integrity, because I never had that until my stepdad, who I will never say is my stepdad, he's my father. Until my father instilled those values in me, and now I try to live every day with that kind of honor and integrity. And so those things were hugely important to who I was, and what I was trying to do. But um, I ended up in my mid 30s. I was working at a design college here in Arizona, and I was getting kind of tired of people telling me that I couldn't get a job just because I didn't have a degree. The world of sales was changing, the work environment was changing, and suddenly, you had to have these degrees in order to even be considered. So I was working at this design school, and I just woke up one day and decided, you know what, I'm going to get my degree. I kind of like the school that I'm working at. I think I'll just get a degree in design. Had never even considered design. Now, I was always a creative writer and kind of a wordsmith, but never anyone that you would consider artistic or any of that. But um, I decided to get my degree there, and they didn't offer any tuition assistance, even though I worked there. So I had to take out loans and get it. But I was determined to get my degree. And I was in my mid 30s, and I was going to school with these kids that were in their early 20s, some adults in their 30s and my age. But for the most part, the kids coming right out of high school or shortly thereafter, and getting their design degree. And these kids had more talent in their finger than I had in my entire body, but they didn't have my heart, and they didn't have my determination. And I actually ended up third in my class. Now, why? Because I wanted it more. I outworked them. I was willing to sacrifice time and effort. So I was going to school full time, I was working full time, and I met um, this girl. Um, she's someone that I probably in a healthy mental state would never have even dated, let alone married. She had 3 kids, and I had the blueprint for how to treat kids that weren't yours. So, I embraced them as my own. I never called them my stepchildren. I always called them my own. Had a affinity to be a dad all my life. So now I had a wife and some kids, and I was going to school full time, working full time. But I still had this underlying anger and this underlying trauma that I had quote unquote dealt with by acknowledging that I had it and thinking that I was managing it, but it was still an undertone to my life. And so my relationship with the kids didn't go well. My relationship with my ex-wife didn't go well. And the only good thing I got out of it was my daughter. She was 2 when I came into her life. She's 25 now, and she will forever be my daughter. So looking back in hindsight, I always say that I was there for her, not for the marriage. And I am blessed that I have this amazing daughter in my life. But after about 7 years, my daughter's mom and I divorced. I moved away from Minnesota because I couldn't handle being in the same environment as she was. So moved back to Arizona because it was comfortable and someplace I knew, and I had a few friends here. Um, and during that time, um, I started working at a university here. I was helping people get their doctorate degree, and I was their advisor and their counselor. And I started off as their enrollment advisor, but then their uh, counselor as they got through the program. So I was working at this college, and again, I was almost 50 at this time. And I thought, "Hmm, I think I'll get another degree. I think I'll get my master's degree." I always liked the way human brain works, and I like the philosophy of the human mind. So I think I'll get a degree in psychology. And again, I had no prior inkling of that field, but I worked my ass off, was a straight A student, would have finished with a 4.0, but I intentionally didn't turn in one assignment because it was a battle for my own mind to I'm a perfectionist at heart, and things need to be done on time and in the right way. And I was busting my ass, and I had to have this battle with myself. This particular paper isn't going to make or break my college degree. This particular paper isn't going to determine whether I have a master's degree in psychology or not. But what this paper will determine is whether I'm okay with getting a B, and proving to myself that I didn't need the A and was okay with the B was a more important aspect to that class than the grade itself. So I fought myself all the way up to the last minute of the deadline. I had the paper written, but I fought all the way up to the last minute of the deadline. Do I submit it? Do I not submit it? Do I submit it? Do I not submit it? And the paper sat on my desk unsubmitted, and the deadline passed. And I got a B instead of an A, and I was okay with that. So my piece at good being good enough, not having to be perfect, uh, helped change a lot of the rest of my life. And it was a good experiment for myself. Um, but as I was getting this degree, I met another woman. This woman was kind and compassionate and loving and caring, and something that I had never had in my entire life. She loved me unconditionally, and she loved me for me. And I was fortunate enough that she not only went out on one date with me, but on two. And we have been together for over 9 years, going on 10 years now. And she is absolutely the most um, best gift that I've ever received. The grace of God gives me life to have her. But again, I was still living this duality and this inner rage. And so this is where my alchemist journey comes in. Um, Last year, I was called by a friend of mine. He had this project up in Minnesota where he lives, and he called me to ask me if I'd come help him with it. And it would require me moving to Minnesota for a short period of time, which turned out to be a long period of time, 9 months. And so I had to be away from my wife and my family and the things that I knew in Arizona. And I agreed to go help him with this project. What I didn't know was the change internally that this time was going to present. See, God has a way of leading you in a direction, but having better in store for you than what you think the direction is supposed to be. So, um, after a few months of being in Minnesota, which is where I was born and raised, I was living a few miles from where I actually grew up. I started to feel this inner call to start to heal. Um, I actually went to the elementary school where I walked to those grounds and I could feel the children and the energy that that was there. And I was able to stand and release all of that hatred that I had for that place. And I was able to go to the church that my grandfather used to drag me to as a strict Catholic. Church was every, you know, part of his life, and I was able to go stand at that altar and release the feelings that I had about it. I was able to eventually bring myself to go to their gravesite, and for the first time in 40 years, put my hands on their tombstone and release all the hatred that I had for them. I went to their old house where I spent many, many, many summers, where I was hit with that bullwhip, where I was angry with my grandfather, where I was abused in many of those rooms. And I was able to, I knocked on the door. I told the resident that, you know, this is a place that my grandparents used to own and that I kind of grew up as my childhood. And I was wondering if it'd be okay if I just walked through the house, you know. And I walked through every single room and I released all of the negative energy, and I forgave all of the things that had happened to me as a child in those places. And um, eventually I was actually able to um, piece together the story of what happened with my biological father and the lies that were told to me about his life and about who he was. And I was actually able to discover that I had two aunts that I never even knew. One lived a few miles from where I had spent time as an adult, and I was able to go visit with her and hear about my uncle and my dad, my stepdad, my biological dad's brother, and his life. And I was able to find an aunt who lives out in Kentucky and connect with her. And I was able to track down where my biological father was buried. He had passed away a few years ago, um, and I was able to connect with people who actually knew him as an adult and hear some of his life and what he had been up to. And I was able to go on this alchemist journey of healing and discovery. And I worked with a trauma coach while I was in Minnesota, and she was able to help me um, release some of this stuff that I've been carrying for my entire life. And towards the end of my stay up there, another important event happened. I got a call one day, and the voice on the other end was from someone I'd never heard of, never knew. But they said that my daughter was in the hospital and she had tried to kill herself. And that is a call that you, as a parent, never want to have happen. Now, as someone who has attempted suicide several times, I knew the pain that comes with that. And being someone who has always tried to be a positive influence in my daughter's life and give her hope and give her support and give her encouragement, um, to hear that she had tried to take her own life was a huge blow to who I thought I was as a person. And what made the situation even worse is how I handled that situation. Because in my mind, I had sacrificed my entire life because I've never had biological children, but I have loved her as my own without reproach her entire life. And what that phone call did was make me feel that everything I had sacrificed had just been shit on. That everything that my wife, who has been like a true mother to her, um, everything that my wife did for her had been dismissed and shit on. And it really brought some anger that I thought I had dealt with back up to the surface. And when I spoke with my daughter about after she got out of the hospital, you know, why didn't you reach out to us? Why didn't you let us know that you were in such a bad place? And my daughter has had a very traumatic life. Her story is on a warrior spirit. She's shared it openly. After I divorced her mother, she was sexually abused by her mother's um, next husband, as well as her mother. She was also drugged and abused for many years before she um, reached out to me for help, and we, along with her brother, was able to get her out of that situation, get her some help. But she's lived a very traumatic and hard life, and I've often blamed myself for leaving her in that viper pit. And I've come to realize that, part of the reason she never spoke up and never told me is because of that anger that I had. She knew that I would have most likely handled it in a way that would have put me in jail. And then she would have lost both of the people that she loved as parents. So she never did that. But anyway, so when I asked her about this attempt at suicide, why didn't you come to my wife and I, and ask for help? And she said to me, because I didn't want to hear your positivity. I didn't want to hear that I was strong enough to get through it. And that gutted me. It gutted me because of I know all of the hardships that I've lived through. I know all of the trauma that I've dealt with. I know everything that I've endured and have always, minus those brief moments of, of um, weakness when I attempted those suicides. Other than those minor moments, I've always known that there is a way out. There's always hope if you look for it. There's a solution to every problem if you try to find it. And so when she told me that she didn't want to hear my positivity, that gutted me, because to me, I can't stand toxic positivity where everything is sunshine and rainbows and unicorn farts and the world is just blah, great. That is not helpful. But being positive and knowing that there's a way out, that there are always hope, that there is something you can do, that's a different type of positivity in my mind, at least it was. So when she said that to me, what I heard her say was, "You're being toxic positive." And that boiled the rage out from me in an instant. And in an instant, instead of being loving and compassion, that rage surfaced. And I exploded on my daughter. And I told her all the things that she was doing wrong. I told her all the ways she wasn't taking responsibility for her life. I told her all the things that she needed to step up and do. If she didn't like my positivity, how did she like this? How did she like this truth that I was now telling her? And instead of being loving and compassionate towards my daughter, I was enraged by what she had done to me in my mind. And obviously, she threw the phone to whoever was in the room with her and said, "I'm done with that." And I had to take a step back, and I realized that I had been meeting my daughter where I expected her to be, not where she was. I was meeting everybody in my life where I expected them to be, not where they truly were. And that's a horrible way to go through life, expecting people to be at their best and at their potential and always seeing the goodness in them. So expecting them to rise to it instead of being compassionate and empathetic to where they are and what they may be going through. And it changed the way that I view everything in my life. Um, my daughter is better now. She's healing, and our relationship is getting stronger because I'm able to meet her in her place, not in my place. And that was part of my own healing journey. Um, so this inner strife that we deal with, we all go through something. We all have something. And we can either truly, truly face it and truly, truly heal from it, or we can just kind of acknowledge it and set it aside, and it festers and boils and manifests its way in areas of your life that you're not even aware of. Why was I so angry all my life? Why was I living a dual life all my life? Why was I handling situations in the violent manner that I was? Because there was no inner peace in who I was. And I've made a vow to myself. As I said, I'm 59 today. I will not enter my 60th year in the same manner that I entered my 59th. I will not be the same person that I was for 58 years of my life. I will not live a dual life internally. For the first time in my life, I get to live my life. And that brings a lot of peace and a lot of comfort within. But here's what I'll tell you, and I coach uh, uh, people to help step into their purpose and their passion to live their authentic life. And I was a much better coach for others than I was for myself. But now I'm much better for myself so I can be better for others. And I'll share that you can't get through by faking it. You can only get through by going through it. And you have to face it head on, and you have to address it with intention and purpose to remove it. Our past is our past and it shapes our future, but it doesn't have to always be drugged with us. And when you can get to a point where you can tell your story from victory instead of victimhood, then you've succeeded. because we're all a victim if we want to be, but we're all victors when we intend to be. And I no longer share the pains and the traumas of my life from a woe is me, what happened to me, look at all the suffering I did. I share it from look what I've overcome and look at the lessons that I've learned along the way and look who I get to be now that it's released. So I would encourage you, whatever you're going through, it doesn't have to define you. Whatever was done to you is not about you. And I said this to my daughter, we are often dealt a shitty hand, but we don't have to play it like one. And we all have the capacity and the ability to play a winning hand if we want it. And so I'm going to end this in the way that I end all of these shows. I ask my guests, what does a warrior spirit mean to you? And for me, a warrior spirit is someone who is still standing every single day. And our 100% may not be the same every day, but every day we give 100% of who we are. Some days are up, some days are down, some days are in between, but every day we give that 100%. And we never stop. We never stop trying to improve. We never stop trying to overcome. We never stop trying to make the world around us a better place. And I know that if you're in my tribe and you're in my circle, you have a warrior spirit. And I encourage you to keep shining your light no matter how dark the world is around you. So I thank you for sharing this journey with me, and I appreciate every single one of you. And I want you to know that if you are struggling or in need, reach out, because none of us can do it alone, no matter how strong we think we are. So have a blessed day and a blessed year and a blessed life. Thank you for joining us on this edition of A Warrior Spirit. We're now on all the major platforms as well as Roku via the Prospera TV app, so be sure to like or subscribe to catch all the episode. And as always, the journey is sacred, the warrior is you, so remember to be inspired, be empowered, and embrace the spirit of the warrior within.
It's not just about the fight, it's how we rise from it.